The sun was merciless that afternoon, casting its heavy golden light over the small town of Maplewood. Heat shimmered off the asphalt, and the crowded main street pulsed with noise horns, hurried conversations, and the rhythmic shuffle of shoes. It was the kind of day where everyone seemed to be rushing, their minds fixed on where they needed to be, with little time for anything or anyone else. Among the sea of people, a little girl emerged from the corner drugstore. Her name was Leela, barely 9 years old, her frame fragile, her clothes faded but carefully kept. In her small hands she held a brown paper bag that crinkled with every careful step she took. Inside was the one thing she had been sent to get, the only thing that mattered to her, her mother's medicine. Her mother had been ill for months, and every pill counted. Every dose meant a day her mother could still smile despite her pain. Leela clutched the bag tightly, whispering to herself as if it would help steady her, "Don't drop it. Don't drop it. This is for Mom." Her lips moved silently around. The words, a chant of responsibility that weighed far heavier than any child her age should have had to carry. Her shoes, worn at the edges, scraped the sidewalk. Her hair clung to her damp forehead, and yet she walked with determination. She had made this journey many times before, but every time felt like carrying the world on her shoulders. And then fate intervened. That had happened in the smallest fraction of a second. A careless bump from a passerby, a stumble over uneven pavement, and the bag slipped from her fingers. She gasped as the sound of glass meeting concrete pierced through the afternoon bustle. The bottle inside shattered. Tiny tablets scattered across the rough gray ground, rolling away like little pearls into the cracks of the street. Leela froze. The world seemed to stop, but only for her. Round her, people kept walking, stepping around or over the tiny white pills as though they were no more than litter. Her knees hit the pavement as she scrambled to gather them up. Her palms pressed against the rough ground, scraping her skin until it bled, but she didn't care. She reached desperately, her fingers trembling as she tried to scoop up what was left. Tears filled her eyes, spilling onto her cheeks. "No, no, no, I can't lose them. Mom needs them. Please, please." Her voice cracked, fragile and small, lost beneath the roar of traffic and footsteps. But the world around her was unkind. A woman in a sleek navy suit paused for the briefest of moments. She glanced down at Leela and sighed with irritation. Children these days can't even hold on to a simple thing. Her words were sharp, dismissive, before she clicked away on her high heels without looking back. Nearby, a man with a grocery bag chuckled under his breath, muttering to no one in particular. Clumsy kid, probably learned it from her family. Even worse, a group of teenagers leaned against a lamppost, watching. One of them smirked and pointed, his voice loud enough to cut through the air. "Look at her, crawling on the ground like it's the end of the world. It's just medicine, kid. Chill." The others laughed, their cruel amusement ringing out as though her heartbreak was nothing more than a passing show. Lila's tears fell harder, dotting the concrete as she tried to gather what she could. The pills slipped through her trembling fingers, some already too far gone, kicked aside by careless feet. She pressed her scraped knees into the ground, the sting of pain nothing compared to the panic rising in her chest. Her mother needed this. Without it, there was nothing, and still nobody stopped. That's when he noticed her. Elias Grant was not the type of man people overlooked. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in an expensive yet slightly wrinkled suit, he carried himself with quiet authority. His salt and pepper hair gave him an air of experience, and though his face showed the weariness of long days, his sharp eyes missed little. At 47, Elias was a man used to boardrooms, contracts, and decisions that shaped companies. But as he stepped out of a nearby cafe, coffee cup in hand, it wasn't a business deal that caught his attention, that it was the sound of glass shattering, and then a child's broken sob. He turned, his gaze landing on the scene others had so easily dismissed. A little girl on her knees, scraping her hands raw as she tried to collect pills that no one cared about. Her tears glistened in the sunlight, her cries lost in the indifference of the crowd. Round her, mocking smiles and careless footsteps only deepened her helplessness. Elias stopped walking. Something about the sight rooted him in place. He remembered, faintly, Another time long ago when he had been the one no one stopped for. That memory burned at the edges of his thoughts, and before he realized it, his feet were moving. He walked against the tide of the crowd, ignoring the strange looks thrown his way, and crouched beside the little girl. "Easy now," he said softly, his deep voice carrying a warmth that surprised even himself. He set his coffee cup aside and reached for the scattered pills. "Let's see what we can save." Leela froze, startled by his presence. She looked up, her wide brown eyes shimmering with tears, not trusting what she saw. Nobody had helped her. Nobody had even cared. And yet here was this stranger, this man who looked like he belonged in an office tower, lowering himself to the hot pavement beside her. You're helping," she whispered, her voice trembling. Elias gave her a small, reassuring nod. "Of course, you shouldn't have to do this alone." For the first time in what felt like forever, Leela felt a flicker of something she thought she had lost hope. Around them, the crowd moved on. Some shook their heads, others whispered, but Elias ignored it all. He carefully picked up the pills one by one, handing them gently to Leela, whose hands were still shaking too much to hold them properly. And as he helped her, he realized something. This wasn't just about a bottle of medicine. This was about the weight this little girl was carrying, weight far too heavy for her young shoulders. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But something told him that helping her today might uncover more than anyone around them could imagine. And he was right, because in that single act of kindness, Elias was about to discover a truth about the little girl that would change both of their lives forever. The crowd had thinned a little by the time Leela and Elias gathered the last pill they could salvage. The sunlight still glared off the pavement, but in the small circle where the two knelt, something softer seemed to settle. People still glanced their way, some curious, some indifferent, but neither of them paid attention. Elias brushed the dirt from his hands, his shirt sleeves rolled slightly above his wrists, and looked at the little girl carefully. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, her hands scraped, and her knees spotted with blood. Yet she pressed her small fists tightly against her chest as if guarding the few precious pills they'd managed to save. For a child her age, the weight in her eyes was startling. "What's your name?" Elias asked gently. She hesitated, blinking at him as though the question itself was dangerous. Finally, in a small, timid voice, she answered, "Leela." "That's a beautiful name," he said, offering her a faint smile. "Leela, do you live nearby? We should get you and those cuts taken care of." Her head shook quickly, almost fearfully. "No, I have to go home. My mom, she needs this medicine. If I'm late, she'll." Her voice faltered, caught between the need to be brave and the fear of saying too much. Elias studied her, something stirring deep in his chest. He recognized desperation when he saw it. He had grown up with it. Long before his wealth, before the boardrooms and accolades, he had been a boy not much older than Leela, carrying burdens that should never have belonged to a child. "Is your mother sick?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Leela's lip trembled, but she nodded. "She can't get out of bed sometimes. The medicine helps her stand, helps her smile. She says not to worry, but I do." She clutched the small paper bag to her chest like a shield. Something about the way she said it struck Elias harder than he expected. The quiet acceptance in her voice, the responsibility she carried without complaint. This wasn't just a child helping her mother. This was survival. "Would you like me to walk you home?" he offered. "Just to make sure you get there safe. The streets are busy today." Leela looked at him warily, unsure whether to trust him. She had learned, far too early, that trust was something rare. But then she glanced at his hands that had picked up her mother's medicine when no one else cared, hands that had bled a little from the pavement just like hers. Slowly, she nodded. They began walking side by side, the flow of pedestrians parting around them. Elias matched his steps to hers, slowing his long stride so she wouldn't struggle to keep up. "Do you go alone often to get this medicine?" he asked after a moment. "Yes," she said softly. "It's not far, just a few streets away." "But sometimes," she trailed off, her gaze fixed on the ground, "sometimes people laugh. They say things about me, about my mom. I try not to listen." Elias clenched his jaw. There was a cruelty in people that he never grew used to. He glanced down at her, wanting to say something that would take away the sting of those words. But before he could, Leela continued, "Today was worse. Everyone saw. They'll remember how I dropped it. They'll say I can't do anything right." Her small voice cracked, the vulnerability she had tried to bury spilling out. "But I tried. I really tried." Elias slowed, kneeling so that he was at her eye level. The bustling street blurred around them. Background noise to the moment that mattered. "Leela," he said firmly but kindly, "you are stronger than anyone I've seen today. Do you know why?" She shook her head, a tear slipping free. "Because while everyone else walked past, you stayed. You didn't give up, even when it hurt. Even when people laughed, you didn't stop fighting for what mattered. That is strength. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her eyes widened slightly, his words striking something deep inside her. No one had ever said it like that before. People called her clumsy, poor, helpless. No one had called her strong. They walked the next few blocks in silence, though the silence was different now. It was lighter, less burdened, as if his words had carved out a little space for hope. The neighborhood shifted as they moved away from the busier street. The shiny storefronts and tall office buildings gave way to older houses with peeling paint, fences sagging with age. The sidewalks cracked more, weeds poking through. Elias noticed it all with a tightening in his chest. He had walked these kinds of streets once, 2 years ago. Leela slowed in front of a small, weathered house at the end of the lane. Its paint was chipped, the porch sagged, and one of the windows was patched with cardboard. She stopped at the bottom of the steps, clutching the bag tighter. "This is home," she said quietly. Elias nodded, but his eyes lingered on the house. Something about it felt heavier than it looked, as though secrets clung to the walls. "Thank you," Leela said, her voice small but sincere. "No one ever helps. But you did." Elias placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Take care of your mother, Leela. And remember what I said, you are stronger than you think." She gave him a tentative smile, the kind of smile that carried both gratitude and longing, as though she wished she could say more. Then she hurried up the porch steps and slipped inside. Elias stood there for a long moment, staring at the door that had closed behind her. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of their paths crossing. Something about that little girl, about her quiet resilience, had reached into a part of him he thought had been buried by years of wealth and distance. He turned to leave, but just as he did, a sound drifted faintly from the house, muffled voices, sharp and cutting. Lila's voice, too soft to hear clearly, followed by another voice, harsher, filled with frustration. Elias froze. The urge to walk away battled with a gnawing instinct in his chest. He had only meant to help for a moment, to pick up the pieces of spilled medicine. But life rarely moved in straight lines, and something told him that what he had witnessed today was only the surface of a much deeper story, one he was now standing on the edge of. He walked away slowly, but his thoughts stayed behind with the little girl in the weathered house. He did not know it yet, but soon he would return, and when he did, the truth waiting behind that fragile door would unravel everything he thought he knew. Because Leela was not just a poor girl with a sick mother. She was someone far more extraordinary, someone whose story would soon shake his world to its core. Night fell over Maplewood with a heavy quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in on every street, muting even the faint hum of cars in the distance. Elias sat in his apartment near the edge of the city, but his mind was nowhere near the walls around him. It was still standing on that weathered porch, still hearing the faint sound of voices from behind the door, still seeing the fragile outline of a girl clutching medicine as if it were treasure. He tried to dismiss it. He told himself that he had done enough, that he had helped as much as anyone could reasonably expect. He had made sure she was safe, had reminded her she was strong, and yet something gnawed at him, a restlessness that wouldn't leave. That little girl had looked at him with eyes far too old for her years, and he couldn't forget it. He barely touched his dinner. He ignored the files waiting for him on his desk, and when he lay down to sleep, his mind replayed her trembling voice, the scrape of her knees, and the echo of harsh words muffled through thin walls. At dawn, Elias made his decision. The following afternoon, as the sun dipped lower and painted the rooftops in a warm glow, He found himself walking down that same cracked sidewalk, toward the small house at the end of the lane. He told himself he was only checking in, making sure she and her mother were all right. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. Something about Leela had unsettled the carefully ordered rhythm of his life. The house looked even more worn in the daylight. The porch sagged under its own weight, and the paint peeled in curling strips. A curtain in the front window moved as he approached, and he wondered if Leela had seen him coming. He paused at the gate, uncertain if he should knock before he could decide. The door opened. Leela stepped out, clutching the frame as though bracing herself. She wore the same faded dress from the day before, though now there was a smudge of dust on the hem. Her eyes widened in surprise when she saw him. "You came back," she whispered. Elias gave a small nod. "I wanted to see how you were doing. How's your mom?" Her expression shifted, a flicker of sadness clouding her face. "She's tired. The medicine helps a little, but she's still very tired." She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder before stepping out onto the porch and closing the door quietly behind her. "You shouldn't be here. My stepfather doesn't like visitors." Elias caught the nervous edge in her voice. "Is he here now?" She shook her head quickly. "He works odd hours. Sometimes he's gone for days. Sometimes he's home too much." Her words trailed off, guarded, but Elias understood more in what she didn't say. They walked a few steps down the lane together, away from the house. Lila's small hand brushed against his sleeve as though testing whether he would pull away. He didn't. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a long pause. "Of course. Why did you help me?" Her eyes searched his face, wide and unblinking. Everyone else just laughed or walked away. "Why didn't you?" Elias stopped walking. It was a question he hadn't even asked himself fully. He thought of the boy he used to be, running through neighborhoods much like hers, scraping together change, hiding bruises he never explained. He thought of the long climb to where he was now, a climb paved with silence and survival. "Because I saw myself," he said finally, his voice lower than before. "A long time ago. I was the one no one helped. I promised myself that if I ever could, I'd be the person I needed back then." Leela studied him with a seriousness that startled him. She nodded slowly, as if tucking his words away in a place she'd keep safe. They stopped by a small patch of grass where the sidewalk ended. Children's laughter echoed from a park nearby, but Leela stayed quiet. Finally, she sat down on the curb, hugging her knees to her chest. Elias lowered himself beside her, ignoring the discomfort of the rough concrete. "Do you know what people call me?" she asked suddenly. "They say I'm the poor girl. The girl who never has anything. The one with broken shoes and messy hair. They don't know me. They just see what they want." Her voice cracked, but she forced it steady. "Sometimes I wonder if that's all I'll ever be." Elias felt something twist inside him. "Do you want to know the truth, Leela?" She turned to him slowly, hesitant. "The world is full of people who only look at the surface. They'll always be loud, always quick to judge. But you," he tapped her shoulder gently, "you are not defined by their words. What matters is who you are when no one is watching. And from what I've seen, you're brave, you're strong, and you love deeply. That's worth more than anything money can buy." Her lips parted, but no words came. For the first time in a long time, she let herself believe that maybe she wasn't just what the world said. Maybe she could be more. The light began to fade, shadows stretching across the street. Leela glanced back toward her house, nervous again. "I should go. If he comes home and sees me gone, it'll be bad." Elias frowned but didn't press her. He stood as she did, and before she turned away, he reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small business card, simple, with his name and number printed neatly across it. "If you ever need help," he said, pressing it into her hand, "no matter what time, no matter why, call me." Leela stared at the card as though it were a foreign object. She held it tightly, nodding once before darting back up the porch steps and slipping inside. The door closed softly, leaving Elias standing in the twilight with an uneasy feeling in his chest. He walked back toward the busier street, but every step felt heavier. He had come thinking it was only kindness, only a moment of help. But as he replayed the look in her eyes, the hidden weight in her words, he realized something deeper. This wasn't just about a little girl carrying her mother's medicine. This was about a life quietly unraveling behind the walls of that fragile house. And whether he admitted it or not, he was already part of it. As the first stars pierced the evening sky, Elias knew he couldn't stay on the sidelines. The story of that little girl wasn't finished not yet, and soon he would discover that Leela was carrying a secret far larger than even she understood. A secret that would not only change her fate, but his own asterisk. The days that followed weighed heavily on Elias. At the office, he sat in board meetings where people debated profits, contracts, and percentages. But his mind drifted back to that peeling house. At the end of the lane, numbers blurred on presentation. Slides, voices became background noise. No matter how hard he tried to bury himself in work, the image of Leela clutching that medicine bag and whispering her fears pressed into his thoughts, like an imprint that wouldn't fade. On the third evening, after their meeting on the curb, Elias found himself walking down the same cracked sidewalk again. Though he hadn't planned it, his driver had dropped him off a block away from his penthouse, but instead of going inside, his feet carried him across the city until he stood once more before the house he couldn't forget. He told himself it was foolish he was a stranger in that child's life, a man who had already done his part. Yet he remained at the corner, watching the dim yellow light glow faintly through the thin curtains from inside. Muffled voices rose. At first, he thought they were too faint to make sense of, but as the night deepened, the tones sharpened. A woman's voice, gentle, weary, pleading, then another voice, lower and sharper, laced with irritation. Elias couldn't make out the words, but the sound alone sent a chill down his spine. He knew what fear sounded like, even through walls. A few moments later, the front door creaked open. Leela stepped out onto the porch, slipping quietly into the night as though she had done this many times before. She hugged a small blanket around her shoulders, her bare feet padding softly across the wooden steps. Elias stepped back into the shadows of a tree, not wanting to startle her. She sat on the porch swing, her small body curled against the cold, her eyes fixed on the stars above. Elias hesitated before stepping into the faint light. Couldn't sleep, he asked gently. Leela jumped, startled, then relaxed slightly when she recognized him. You came back again. Her voice was soft, a mixture of surprise and something else, relief. I was nearby, Elias lied. Though both of them knew it wasn't true, he climbed the porch steps slowly, lowering himself onto the far end of the swing so she wouldn't feel crowded. The wood creaked beneath his weight. For a while, they sat in silence, the night air carrying the faint smell of earth and summer grass. Leela tucked her knees under her chin. It gets loud in there sometimes, she whispered. When it does, I come out here. The stars are quieter. Elias looked at her profile, the way the moonlight brushed against her tangled hair. She was so small, yet she carried herself like someone who had long since learned that childhood wasn't a shield from hardship. Do you want to talk about it? He asked. Her lips pressed together, as though she was fighting with herself. Finally, she spoke. My stepfather, he doesn't like me much. He says I cost too much, that I'm just another mouth to feed. Sometimes he says Mom would be better off if I wasn't here. Her words were matter of fact, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Elias felt his chest tighten. He clenched his hands to keep the anger from showing. That's not true, he said firmly. Don't you ever believe that. Your mother loves you. I saw it in the way you fight for her. Leela looked down, her fingers tracing the worn wood of the swing. She tries to protect me, but she's sick. She can't always stop him when he gets angry. She swallowed hard. That's why I get the medicine. If she's stronger, maybe things will get better. Elias exhaled slowly, steadying his voice. Leela, listen to me. You should never have to carry this alone. It's not your job to fix everything. But if I don't, who will? She asked, her eyes wide, shimmering with both defiance and despair. The question pierced him. Elias had asked himself the same thing as a boy. When silence filled his own house and help never came, he understood too well what it meant to be the one who held everything together, too small and too young, but carrying the weight anyway. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Maybe you don't have to do it alone anymore. Before Leela could answer, the door behind them creaked. The porch light flickered on. and a man's shadow stretched across the wooden planks. A tall figure stepped out, broad-shouldered, his face worn but hardened by life. His eyes narrowed when they landed on Elias. "Who are you?" the man demanded, his voice edged with suspicion. Leela flinched, shrinking back into the swing. "He's just a friend," she whispered quickly. Elias stood slowly, straightening his posture. He met the man's gaze evenly, calm but steady. "My name is Elias. I was passing through and saw Leela sitting out here alone. I thought I'd keep her company for a moment." The man's jaw tightened. "She doesn't need company. Go on, get lost." Lila's hand twitched, as if she wanted to say something but didn't dare. Elias glanced at her, then back at the man. Everything in him wanted to challenge the hardness in those eyes, to demand answers. But he also knew pressing now could make things worse for her. So he nodded once. "Of course. Good night, Leela." He stepped off the porch, his footsteps steady. Even as his thoughts burned, he could feel the man's glare following him down the street until he disappeared around the corner. That night, sleep refused to come. Elias paced his apartment, every detail of the encounter replaying in his mind. The way Leela shrank at her stepfather's voice, the fear in her eyes, the resignation in her words. It was a story he knew all too well and one he could no longer ignore. But what unsettled him most was not the cruelty of the man in that house. It was the question of why. Why did her mother stay with someone who spoke of her child as a burden? Why did Leela carry the weight of responsibility no child should? And why, when he looked into her eyes, did he sense there was something more she wasn't telling him? The answers were hidden in that fragile home, behind walls that whispered more than they revealed. And Elias knew, without a doubt, that he would return not just as a passerby, but as someone determined to uncover the truth. Because there was something about Leela, something she didn't yet understand herself, that would soon rewrite both of their lives in ways neither could imagine. The next morning, Elias found himself awake before sunrise, restless and unsettled. The memory of the previous night clung to him like a shadow he couldn't shake. Lila's small frame on the porch, her trembling hands, and the fear in her eyes had left a mark he couldn't ignore. He knew that if he truly wanted to help, he would need to go beyond gestures of kindness and discover the full story behind the fragile house, and the girl who carried the weight of so much responsibility. He arrived at her street just as the town was stirring to life. The sun peeked over the rooftops, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalks. Elias paused at the corner, watching the house. Its worn paint seemed to glow faintly in the morning light, and he noticed small details he hadn't before: the chipped windows, the uneven shutters, and the carefully stacked boxes by the side of the porch. There was a rhythm to the house, a silent order beneath the surface of neglect, and he realized that it had been maintained carefully by someone who still cared deeply despite the difficulties. Elias took a deep breath and approached the front door. He knocked gently. There was no immediate answer. He knocked again, a little firmer. Still nothing. Just as he was about to turn away, the door creaked open slightly. Leela peeked out, her eyes wide, shadowed with both caution and curiosity. I didn't hear you," she said softly. "It's early." "I know," Elias said, offering a warm smile. "I just wanted to check on you and your mother. Can I come in for a moment?" Her eyes darted toward the interior of the house, and she hesitated. Then, after a long pause, she nodded. "Okay, but be quiet." Inside, the house smelled faintly of herbs and medicine, a mixture of cleaning supplies and the lingering scent of baked bread. The rooms were small, but there was a sense of care in the way items were arranged, books stacked neatly, a blanket folded just so, and pictures of Leela and her mother on the walls. Elias noticed the subtle hints of a life trying to survive, against odds far too difficult for a child to comprehend. Leela led him to a small living area where her mother, pale and fragile, sat in a worn armchair. Her eyes lifted slowly, a weak smile forming as she recognized the visitor. "Good morning," Elias said softly. "I just wanted to see how you were feeling today." Her mother's voice was faint but steady. "Thank you for helping Leela the other day," she said. "She always worries too much about me." Elias nodded, trying to gauge how much to say. "I can see why she's so determined. She's very strong." Her mother's eyes softened. A mixture of pride and concern. Strong is the only way she can be. Life hasn't been gentle to us, but she keeps us both moving forward. Elias felt a pang in his chest. He knew there was more beneath the surface. Something hidden in the careful way she spoke, the guarded tone in her words as they talked. Elias noticed documents tucked beside the armchair. He casually glanced at them. Medical bills, old letters, and what looked like legal papers. One particular envelope caught his attention. It was marked with a seal he didn't recognize, slightly faded with age. Curiosity compelled him to ask, though he kept his tone casual. "What's this?" Her mother hesitated, eyes flicking toward Leela as if measuring what could safely be revealed. "It's some old family papers. Nothing important for you to worry about." Elias nodded slowly, but his instincts told him otherwise. Something about the seal, the careful storage, suggested significance. "If you ever need help with anything, legal matters, or anything else, I have experience in those areas," he offered. Her mother's gaze softened, a flicker of hesitation passing over her face. I appreciate that. It's complicated, and I've tried to handle it myself for so long." Leela, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "Mom, he's different. He might be able to help." Her mother's lips tightened, but there was a hint of hope there, fragile but undeniable. Elias spent the next hour in careful conversation, asking gentle questions, listening more than speaking, letting them reveal what they were willing. And, piece by piece, he began to understand that there was more to Lila's family than the world had seen. Her mother had once been part of circles Elias could only imagine, people of influence and resources, but had withdrawn for reasons left unsaid, living quietly in a neighborhood that belied her past. The revelation struck him like a quiet storm. Leela wasn't just a girl burdened by circumstance. She was someone whose life intersected with worlds Elias had never imagined. The medicine, the stepfather, the sacrifices, all were threads in a tapestry more intricate than he had first assumed. Just as he was processing this, a sudden sound came from the next room, a drawer opening loudly. A faint shuffle of paper. Elias turned sharply, his heart pounding. Lila's mother glanced toward the door nervously. "I told you not to go in there," she said softly. A warning that was more than just for Leela. Elias felt a chill. The air seemed heavier suddenly, charged with unspoken secrets. "I wasn't going to," he started, but then paused. Lila's eyes met his, wide and earnest. She whispered, "There's something I've never told anyone. Something that explains why people look at us the way they do." Elias leaned closer, his pulse quickening. "What is it?" She hesitated, trembling. I think people would be shocked if they knew who I really am. My mother tried to keep it a secret, but maybe it's time someone else knows." Elias felt the weight of the moment pressing in, the quiet urgency in her voice. He realized this wasn't just about helping with medicine or protecting her from her stepfather anymore. The truth about Leela was coming to light, and it would change everything he thought he knew about her family, and the life she had been living in the shadows. As the sun dipped lower, casting long streaks of golden light through the window, Elias knew that the next step would be pivotal. What Leela revealed tonight would not only challenge everything he believed, but it would thrust them both into a journey neither could have anticipated, a journey that would uncover secrets, redefine identities, and test the limits of trust and courage. And deep down, he understood that when the truth came out, the world would never look at Leela or at him the same way again. The night had settled over Maplewood like a soft, heavy blanket, but Elias could not sleep. The words Leela had whispered earlier, the weight of her secret, echoed in his mind. He knew that the time for patience was over. Whatever she had been keeping hidden, it was bigger than medicine, bigger than hardship, and it was time for the truth to come out. The following afternoon, he returned to the small house. Determined yet careful, he found Leela sitting quietly on the porch, her knees drawn up, her gaze distant. She had that look again, the one of someone carrying far more than a child should, the look that had captured his attention from the very first day. "Leela," he said softly, sitting beside her, "I think it's time you tell me everything. I can help, but only if I know the whole story." Her hands tightened around the blanket she had wrapped around her shoulders. She hesitated, and Elias waited, giving her the space to summon the courage she clearly needed. Finally, she exhaled, a sound that was both fear and relief, and began. "My mother, she wasn't always sick," Leela started, her voice low. "She used to be someone important. People listened to her. They respected her. She had power and influence. But something happened, something that made her leave that life behind. She wanted to protect me, to hide me from the people who might hurt me." Elias leaned in, absorbing each word. He had suspected that there was more to her family than he had initially understood, but hearing it confirmed a thread of intuition he had been chasing for days. "My stepfather, he isn't who you think he is," Leela continued, her voice trembling slightly. "He came after her when she left that world. He wanted control, for reasons I don't fully understand. He never cared about us, he only cared about what he could take." Elias's jaw tightened. "So everything you've been protecting your mother, yourself, the medicine, it's all part of keeping her safe from him?" Leela nodded, tears brimming. "Yes, she tried to fight, but she couldn't. That's why I've had to do things myself. That's why I have to be strong, even when everyone else sees me as weak." For a moment, the weight of her words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Elias realized that the little girl he had first seen on the sidewalk was not just strong, she was extraordinary. She had survived threats and fears that would have broken many adults. Yet she carried herself with humility and love. "Leela," Elias said, his voice firm but kind, "you and your mother don't have to face this alone anymore. Whatever the secret is, whatever danger your stepfather represents, I will help you." Her eyes widened, disbelief mingling with hope. "Really?" she whispered. "Yes," he said, leaning back slightly. "But we need to be careful. We need a plan. And first, I need to understand everything your mother can tell us. Then, together, we can protect her and you, and finally, expose the truth to the world safely." They entered the house quietly, Leela leading him to her mother's room. Her mother looked up as they entered, a mixture of relief and caution on her face. Leela took a deep breath and relayed the conversation, her voice steady now, bolstered by the presence of someone who could finally act to protect them. Elias listened intently as her mother confirmed the story, how she had once been a respected figure in her field, how her decision to leave had been sudden and protective, and how her stepfather had appeared afterward, not out of love but out of greed and a desire for control. When the full story was revealed, Elias felt a mix of anger, determination, and admiration. He saw the resilience in Leela and her mother, and he recognized the injustices they had endured. But he also saw the opportunity for justice, for redemption, for a life reclaimed. "Leela," Elias said, turning to her, "you are not just a survivor. You are someone who can change the course of this story, and I will make sure you have the chance to do it safely." Plans were made carefully over the next few days. Elias used his resources to secure a safe place for them temporarily, away from the threat of her stepfather. He contacted trusted legal advisors to ensure protection, and began the process of documenting everything that could prove the mother's past status and the stepfather's manipulations. Throughout it all, Leela's courage never wavered. She faced every new obstacle with determination, and with Elias by her side, she began to see that the world could hold safety and kindness, not just fear and neglect. Finally, the day came when they could confront the truth openly, with legal protection in place, her mother's history verified, and Elias ensuring their security. Leela and her mother stepped forward. The revelation of their past shocked those who had underestimated them, but it also restored their dignity and offered them a chance at a life free from fear. Elias watched Leela's eyes sparkle as she realized the world wasn't only a place of hardship. She was safe, her mother was safe, and together they could begin a new chapter. As they stood in the light of that new beginning, Elias realized that what had started as a small act, picking up a fallen bottle of medicine, had led to something far greater. It had uncovered courage, resilience, and a secret that changed everything. And in the process, it reminded him that sometimes, even the smallest act of kindness can ignite the most profound transformations. Because one little girl's bravery, a mother's hidden past, and the intervention of a stranger had created a ripple that no one could ignore, a ripple that would continue to inspire, change lives, and prove that hope and kindness are more powerful than fear.